Good evening. I'm Tracy Steady Hardcastle, and I am thrilled to be here with you this evening to talk for the second time this month about a topic that is very important and very much part of what society is talking about right now, which is autism. 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism, according to statistics in 2023. And when we think about autism, at least from a functional genomics perspective, we think of it as not being static. It's biology that's expressed through a unique set of pathways, not one pathway. There's not one thing that's definitively can be said about autism. And so rather than treating it as a fixed condition, what we want to talk about is how can we work with the body's biology to reduce the strain and enhance the quality of life for people with this diagnosis. So I'm thrilled this evening to have with me Jackie McMillan. And as an autistic biohacker, Jackie helps people who've tried the recommended educational, therapeutic, and medical approaches who are now looking for what will turn their unique experiences with autism challenges around. Jackie began biohacking her own lifelong brain inflammation, which is in parentheses autism, in 1976. Within 7 years, she had stopped rocking and droning, learned to tell time and navigate, and shifted brain availability from about 10% of waking hours to 60% or more, enabling friendships, employment, and ever higher degrees of social integration. And her quality of life is still getting better. For over 30 years, she's shared the shortcuts to increasingly stabilize volatile emotions, optimize brain function, and minimize or eliminate pain and other costs of chronic inflammation, and is highly motivated to spare others unnecessary despair, debility, discomfort, and disease. Her guiding principle is, if you know things have to change, you may as well enjoy it. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you.
It's so nice to have you here. So Jackie and I will start by having a conversation about some of the crossover between functional genomics and biohacking interventions. And then we will, as per usual, answer audience questions, starting at the top of the hour, which is 7 East Coast time or 4 West Coast time. And for those of you who may be wanting to think about this in the context of your DNA 360 reports, please feel free to have those out or download the app for easy transition between reports. So Jackie, what kind of intake do you use when you're first meeting with clients? Can you go over your SMART system with our audience?
Right. Okay. So the SMART system is something that I developed to help people understand autism through a very different window. If you approach autism through most of our medical system right now, you'll get told, we don't know what causes it, nothing can be done, and often it's against standards of practice to actually treat the symptoms that in many cases are causing autism challenges to be a lot worse than they need to be. And so the first thing I do is a very comprehensive symptom breakdown. So that's the S in SMART, where we do a really thorough assessment of what symptoms is this individual expressing, because there are no people with autism who don't have brain inflammation. Brain inflammation to a very high degree is essentially what autism is. And it's any learning and developmental challenge, any mental emotional challenge, you're looking at various types and degrees of brain inflammation. And so once you look at brain inflammation, you start to recognize that there are 5 types of illness in the body that can be bad enough to cause the body to be so inflamed that the brain is also inflamed. And so then you're into model. What is your model of autism? That's the M in the SMART method. And so I introduce people to this understanding of autism, kind of like stress gone mad, where you've got so many different stressors coming from so many different directions on a system that is already ill. And how do you support that system so it navigates what it's got to face better, has more resilience? So the model then is that there are 5 types of injury that can, or insult that can cause the injury of autism. And then we move on to assess, adapt, achieve. That's the A portion of the SMART system, where we're looking at, okay, if you have these symptoms, what are the best at home, do it yourself, no prescription, lifestyle things that you can do to impact those in a positive way? And we use the symptoms themselves as our bioindicators, as our trackers of whether we're actually making headway or not. And then the next is, once you start recognizing which interventions you're really seeing gains from, it tells you a lot more about the root causes without having to go through a whole bunch of really expensive testing. And then once you know your root causes, you can actually do a reach for potential. You can take what you've learned from what optimizes your particular situation, and you can start really reinforcing what you're doing and get interventions that line up with what it is that you're doing on a lifestyle basis. And finally, the T is for treatment. There are things. There are injuries that are chemical injuries, that are immune injuries, that actually can be treated, can be turned around. And sometimes you need very specific types of treatment that aren't part of our dominant mainstream medical system, but that there's a lot of research behind in our dominant mainstream medical journals. And so if you've been fishing in the journals, you can find what are the treatments that are most likely to give benefit in this particular situation. And the reason I put treatment last is that if your lifestyle is undermining the results that you want to be achieving with the treatments, you're going to be spending a lot more time and resources on those treatments. If instead you get your lifestyle aligned with what really gets you the results that you want, and then you embark on those treatments, you definitely get the best bang for your buck, and it goes much, much more quickly.
Thank you so much. And I want to get into some specifics of like of the different models and the different treatments and all of those things. But first, I do want to make some links for our audience around brain inflammation. So when I think of brain inflammation, some of the genes in your gene report that I think of, everyone knows, well, anyone who's seen me on a webinar before knows that I love 9p21. I don't know why, but I do. And so when we're looking at 9p21 in your gene report, you're counting up how many Gs you have. And so when people have, the more suboptimal this is, so that would be, 4, 5, or 6, stress, oxidative stress, exercising too intensely, heavy metals, toxins building up in the bloodstream, all of these things can really cause inflammation, specifically of the vessels, right? And so vessels in the brain, there's less room in there. You know what I mean? And if those vessels get inflamed from the other things that Jackie's going to talk about, and from some of the things that can happen for people genetically, because everything works together, then people with suboptimal 9p21 are more susceptible to inflammation of the vessels in the brain, as well as the uterus and everywhere else in the body, because we have vessels everywhere. But specifically, we want to think about this in this context, right? So looking at your 9p21 is a good place to start. And last week we did talk about methylation. So this is where FUT2, whether or not you can absorb vitamin B12 in the gut or not, comes into play. So if you are an AG or a GG, you would want to use sublingual vitamin B12. This is where you're going to look for your MTHFR, your SHMT1, your MTR, and your MTRR. And we can get into the details of those later, but I'm just trying to give people, if you go to your methylation report, that's where you'll see those. And you can also just go to the inflammation report and see what it says in there, because that's going to talk about mitochondrial stress. And that's going to talk about your glutathione system, whether or not you have the ability to utilize glutathione. So I just wanted to throw a little bit of genes in there before I continue asking my questions of Jackie. So Jackie, when you're talking about the different places that the inflammation that ends up in the brain starts, where are we talking about?
Okay. All right. So the injuries that cause or the insults that cause the injury of autism are first, there's kind of a deadly triad that's been getting worse and worse since the First World War, when better living through chemistry really started to kick into gear. And that is gut dysbiosis, which means wrong, bio, life, is condition. So you've got the wrong life in your gut. You've got the wrong microbial balance in your gut. Um, the next is heightened toxic body burden. Pretty well, actually, every autistic who has been tested to date has a much higher toxic body burden than the general population, because all of us who have autism have impaired detox to some degree. And so this is one of the hallmarks of autism. The two medical things that all autistics share are high toxic body burden and brain inflammation. With students, you seem to have autism. But the third one is chronic infection. And those three have so much overlap because of the systems involved. If one of them goes sideways, guaranteed the other two are going to follow. And then the two others are the stress trauma continuum. The more stress you're under, and the body doesn't differentiate where stress is coming from and what type of stress you're experiencing. It's all just cumulative stress, and it lands the same way. And sooner or later, you reach a place where your body cannot handle more stress, and it starts to land as trauma. And so a lot of autistics have a lot of trauma. And then the last one is direct brain injury, because of course, as soon as you have a brain injury, the first thing that happens is the gut blood barrier snaps open, the blood brain barrier snaps open, and all of the undigested foods, microbes, and poo that is floating through your digestive tract starts to float through your bloodstream and float through your brain. And recuperating from something like that is dramatic. And takes a lot of work, but it can be done. All five of these are treatable.
Well, I have a few things, I have a few thoughts, and then I would like to get into, what you recommend to people. So the stress piece, this is where everyone can look at yours or your child's or your grandchild's, whoever's DNA 360 you happen to be looking at, where you can look at their mood and behavior profile, right? So some people, for instance, if you have deletions in ADRA2B, the receptor doesn't shut off as quickly. So when you have a stressor that happens that makes noradrenaline flood your system, which happens to everyone, every single human, that's one of the things that can happen to them. But if it doesn't shut off quite as quickly, then it hangs out in the system for longer. And then so that would look like a 1D or a DD on your gene report. And then your COMT gene also impacts this, because if you have a slow COMT, which would be AA, then that noradrenaline is staying in there even longer. And so the imprint that this situation leaves on your brain is going to be bigger than someone who either doesn't have a deletion in ADRA2B or has a fast COMT, which would be GG if you're looking for the letters. So that's one of the places that I would point to. There are more genes in the mood and behavior that would come into play, but I just want to briefly talk about those, and then also to say that our gut 360 test can help point the way toward which specific life might be growing in your intestines that you don't want, and what life you want to be growing in your intestines isn't there. So it kind of provides a roadmap, so that things can happen more quickly, with more clarity, and to know whether it's not enough of something, too much of something, or both. And it's usually a combination of all of those. But it's good to know that, because sometimes people start taking a probiotic and it might not be the right thing for them. one of my understandings is that sometimes people within the autism community can end up with either diarrhea or constipation, and certain probiotics can make either of those conditions worse for someone if it's not the right strain. So knowing what you're dealing with is a really good idea. And then inflammation, once again, it goes back to some of the reports that I've already talked about that I will definitely get into in a more deep way, but I did just cover them last week. So I want to get more of Jackie and less of me. so Jackie, what does treatment look like? What are you recommending to people? And obviously, none of the recommendations that we make here are specific to you, audience member, without consulting with someone. But these are just sort of generalizations about the kinds of things that Jackie recommends.
So there are kind of 12 main categories of lifestyle that I asked people to focus on getting within optimal ranges of tolerance for health. And what I mean by that is I'm just going to use the example of oxygen. If you think about the air surrounding us, there's a certain percentage of oxygen in that air at which we all seem. But if you go a little too high in oxygen, people start going loopy. And then if you go really too high in oxygen, people will die. If you go a little too low in oxygen, people start getting really dozy and can't focus, can't do anything. And if you go way too low, people die. But right in the middle is that Goldilocks zone. It's the sweet spot. It's that place where if we have the right percentage of oxygen range in the air, we really thrive. Well, if you think about that for all of the vitamins and minerals and all of the components in our air and all of the toxins that surround us, sometimes we can handle a certain amount of toxin. But if we go outside that certain range, we stop being able to handle it. And maybe we stop being able to handle other chemicals that are in the same class of chemicals. And so what I encourage people to do is start making lifestyle changes. And those lifestyle changes, I'm just going to go through the list of the 12 aspects of life. The first one is it's kind of, how do you make decisions? What's your attitude? And what are your belief systems? Because a belief can change in a fraction of a second. And if you're making decisions based on an incorrect belief, and all of a sudden you have that snap, and you're able to start making decisions based on a much healthier belief and a much more correct belief, your quality of life can improve very quickly. So that's kind of the first one. How do you make change? Because it really has to do with the beliefs that are underlying. The second one is air quality. Air quality will land in seconds. If you are breathing in air that has toxins in, you don't really have filtration through your airways. You've got a little sponge between your sinuses and your brain, and anything you're breathing in is just going straight into the brain. And when your liver and kidneys aren't able to keep up with the load, hello, autism, what happens is there's nothing pulling that toxic load out of the bloodstream or can't pull it out fast enough. And of course, it goes into the brain, and the brain starts getting really inflamed. And one of the things, Tracy, you mentioned earlier was that inflammatory swollen response. One of the worst headaches that those of us in the spectrum get is this feeling. If you've ever worn climbing shoes or been on an airplane and not been able to take your shoes off, and it just feels like the shoes are shrinking on your feet as your feet swell and get more and more uncomfortable, imagine that being your brain. Your brain feels like it's swelling and getting more and more uncomfortable, but you can't take your skull off. And so air quality is something that can make a difference really, really quickly for better or for worse. And so knowing what kinds of things you want to put into the air to improve quality of life, health, and function is another piece of the air quality picture. Next, after that, you've got, so air is within seconds, water within minutes. If you have contaminated water, you know within minutes that something's not right. Your biology immediately starts to tell you something's wrong here. And dehydration, the same. You can really notice functional drops when you are dehydrated. The next one is food. Um, we have really embarked far down the experiment of better living through chemistry in our food system. And many of these chemicals our bodies are not designed to deal with and don't know what to do with. And they get squirreled away in fat cells or start to make fatty liver, or there are lots of things that can happen with those toxins. But uh, in essence, they get in the way of our probiotics surviving in our gut and actually digesting what we've eaten into something that we can run with, we can use. If the proteins we eat don't get broken down into the individual amino acids that are the building blocks for our repair and maintenance, which is what our DNA primarily does, we're out of luck. We're not actually getting what we need. So food is the next on the list, and it's big. Next one after that is, I call it environment, but it's really sort of the indoors versus outdoors question. We've been designing our lives to be more and more indoors. And there's a bit of a swing the other way that started about 10, 15 years ago with Richard Love's book, Last Child in the Woods, looking at nature deficit disorder, looking at what happens to kids if they don't get time outdoors. And it's a very, very unhappy, unhealthy developmental picture if we don't get enough time outdoors. And part of it is we've created very toxic indoor environments. It's rare to find an indoor environment that is made of non-toxic materials. And if you want to be healthy in a modern home, you often have to do a certain amount of adaptation in terms of what fabrics are covering your furniture and what your furniture is actually made of and what kind of air cleaning you've got going on. So that's the next one. The sixth one is skin. Skin, you really have to pay attention to. It's a major highway for both good things and not good things to get into the bloodstream and to get into the lymphatic fluid. And once things are in the bloodstream and the lymphatic fluid, your body has to figure out what to do with them. Anything that contacts your skin, whether it's plastic clothing, whether it's, these skincare products, there are so many things that are included um, in the things that we come in contact with on a regular basis that are causing harm to our biology and our chemistry, uh, and some of it to our gut microbiome as well. So the next one after that is cleansing. And cleansing is kind of a two parts to this one. The first one is all got sort of a natural drainage system in our bodies where the brain lymphatic fluid drains during deep sleep into the body's lymphatic fluid, which then by movement and exercise drains into the bloodstream, which then drains through the liver and the kidneys, with the liver taking fat soluble toxins out and the kidney taking water soluble toxins out, and the waste going out through the urine and the feces. Well, if anything lower down on that chain isn't working, you're not going to detox all that well. So your drainage system, it has to be working well before you even look at whether the liver is conjugating things properly. So for example, if you've got constipation and your body's trying to get rid of toxins, you're going to be reabsorbing them from the wastes that are sitting there for far too long in the colon instead of moving on out the way they're designed to. And so you end up recycling toxins, which isn't particularly good for anyone. So that's your drainage system. When you have, for example, when you wake up and you don't feel rested, a lot of the times that means that your brain isn't draining properly. If you have swelling in your fingers or in your feet, that's an indicator that your lymphatic fluids aren't draining properly. If your blood is kind of thick and dark colored, That's an indicator that your liver and kidneys might not be fully able to do their jobs and might need some cleanup themselves. And then, all of these things get backed up if your colon isn't moving wastes out. Um, so that's the drainage end of things in cleansing. The other end of things is um, there are particular interventions that you can do to support your body in detoxing particular things better. And there are particular symptoms that tell you if there are certain pathways of liver detox that aren't optimized, or that, your liver and gallbladder bile ducts might be clogged from biofilm, sticky biofilm from undesirable microbes that have taken over because your probiotics aren't there to do their job. So then that's kind of drainage and detox. They're kind of they go together, but you can't detox if you don't have your drainage system working properly. After that, you've got frequencies. There are certain frequencies of light that are very, you've got red light therapy and infrared therapy and all kinds of things out there. And there are certain frequencies of light that are quite damaging to us. There are certain frequencies of sound that are good for us. There are frequencies of sound that are not good for us. And there are certain types of music that are shown to have a very beneficial physiological effect overall. There are certain types of music that have extremely negative physiological effects, even if you really like that music. And so, when you're looking at frequencies, you also have to look at electromagnetic frequencies. And there's a fascinating book out there called The Invisible Rainbow. If you're looking for the history of human interaction with electromagnetic fields, it gives you a sense of where a lot of the chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and all kinds of challenges that have just come up and more and more and more as we change our electromagnetic environment. So that's frequencies. The next one is looking at crises. Now, this is different from decision making in that when we get triggered, when we get stressed, and we're not responding in a resilient way, there are particular choices you can make that will restabilize you quickly and allow you to resume healthy actions, healthy living, healthy self-care, these kinds of things. And so really looking at how you handle crises is one of the things that has to get taken care of if you're going to turn an autistic life around, because autistics are closer to that edge of tipping over into crisis. The cumulative stress is so high, coming from so many directions, that we call it a meltdown. Our likelihood of having a meltdown where we go into a hopeless, helpless state of just, I can't take this anymore. It's the faster you can get out of that state and back into an empowered state, the better your life becomes, because that's one of the most profoundly negative states that you can get into. After that, we're looking at what are, this is tricky. I call it media and addiction. The two seem to go hand in hand for a variety of reasons. Essentially, we have a lot of media that's encouraging us to go into a fear state. And when we're in that fear state, we're much more likely to engage in compulsive and addictive patterns that mean we buy more. And so that means that advertisers get some benefit from their advertising dollars. And so there's kind of this vicious circle going on in media right now. And so spending time in normal mainstream media settings is something you have to detox from as well, because you cannot be constantly putting yourself into a fear state and heal. It's contraindicated. If you are in a state of fear, the halves of your brain are stressed. They're not communicating with each other. You're outside of rest, digest, learn, and heal. If you want to be doing any of those four, you have to come out of a sympathetic reaction and go into a parasympathetic, which is where you are able to rest, digest, learn, and heal, as opposed to fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, which is the sympathetic. All right. And sympathetic dominance is very, very common in the autism spectrum. And then the next one is looking at what is your socializing situation like that? Many people with autism are quirky, and I will fully own that. I am quirky. And when we're quirky, there are certain segments of the population that can handle that just fine, and certain segments of the population that seem to be offended and upset by whatever we do. And if you can start shaping your life around those people who seem to just be live and let live and enjoy what there is to enjoy, your life gets a lot better than when you're hanging out with those people where you can do no right. And they're good guidelines for how do you create safe and welcoming social environments, up to and including how do you talk with autistics about sexuality? Because a lot of autistics don't have good social skills and are trying to learn about natural biological urges in ways that aren't particularly healthy, for example, online. And we need to take that back. We need to reclaim that and actually walk autistics through what is healthy sexuality, what is not healthy sexuality, why, and help autistics understand that there are a lot of predators out there, because anytime you have a disability, you are much, much more vulnerable to predators. It's about 10 times the normal social rate in terms of sexual interference for people with disabilities of some sort. And it's not putting that out there to scare people, but putting out there to say, let's be proactive about this. Let's actually train people to talk about what is and is not okay, and train them what to do if something happens that is not okay. And then the 12th is, so this is tricky. I mean, it's not like energy isn't wound through every topic so far, and that's certainly how I teach these topics. But the 12th one is really about mind, body, emotions, and spirit being inextricably intertwined, and not being able to have an impact on any one of those without impacting all of the others. We have a medical system that's very mechanistic. It's a Cartesian system, and it's in the process of evolving. We're not quite to a new model yet, but there's lots and lots of kicking going on. But this Cartesian model is not okay. I don't think I can finish that thread because I've just hit a dead end in the brain. Sometimes that happens when I'm tired, so my apologies. I think what I want to say on this one is that we are frequency beings. From a quantum physics perspective, we are mostly space that is being held together by intention in order to have particular experiences of learning and growth and evolution. And that is a very strange perspective for science to be promoting. And there's some fascinating books from the 1960s and 70s, such as The Dancing Movie Masters, that looked at the overlap between new physics, quantum physics, and spiritual experiences of spiritual leaders around the world, particularly from Tibet, because that's one of the places that so much spiritual development has really gone on. And your fastest changes in quality in life and health will happen when you can recognize that these four things are intertwined inextricably, And if you're working with energy and energy awareness, it is by far your fastest path to positive change. And then there's a 13th that's not really a new thing, but it's a recognition that if you try to do everything all at once, you're going to stress yourself out and it's going to be counterproductive and nobody's going to be happy. And so you need to spiral. You need to keep spiraling and reconnecting and going, okay, what's the low hanging fruit this time around? What can I do in food? What can I do in water? What can I do in socializing? Oh, I'm going to need to make a tweak over here in terms of the amount of outdoor time I get. And so there's this constant spiraling, reconnecting, rebalancing. And it's like you're going up this mountain. There are plateaus, and you keep passing by some of the views that you've been past before, but you're passing by them from higher up that mountain. It might look the same, but what you've experienced in between means that you have so much more capacity to deal with that view. And so really, I think that 13th point is recognizing we're human. We can't do it all at once. We've got to be very hard-nosed, realistic about the process of change, and we can, and hopefully we can handle it.
Thank you so much for all of that. I'm sure that our audience learned so much. And so I had the pleasure of interviewing Jackie for a podcast that hasn't come out yet before we did this. And one of the things she told me was a story of how she discovered how important the outdoors is to her. And it's so important, in fact, that she lives sort of out in the middle of nowhere. So there were a couple of times we didn't miss much when your internet just froze for a second. So I just wanted to let the audience know that it's because Jackie is walking her talk. And sometimes that comes, the price of that is a couple of seconds of freezing on the internet. So, but I caught everything, and I'm sure that our audience did too. But I thought that was important to stress. Like, you figured out that that's what you needed as a person in order to thrive, and to go from like one very distinct state to another very distinct state. And that's how important it is, right? And what can happen as a result of optimizing for yourself. Mm-hmm. So when Jackie was talking about liver and detox and kidneys and things like that, it made me think, of course, of a gene. One in particular, it made me think of many. So if you all want to look at your CYP1A2, CYP1A2, if that is slow, then a lot of so this gene helps create an enzyme that catalyzes over 100 substrates. That's a lot of things, including estrogen and arachidonic acid and caffeine. And so if it's processing it more slowly, remember how Jackie was talking about if you already have a buildup and then you add something into the already overflowing basket, then the basket doesn't look so great. It's got stuff spilled all over it, or it breaks or whatever. Not a perfect analogy, but you know what I'm getting at. Likewise, so that would be a slow would be either AC or CC. Whereas if you have an AA, but later down the stream, your GST pathways or your SOD2 are suboptimal, you may be converting the substrates using the CYP1A2, but then they're stuck in this sort of limbo where other things aren't coming in to transform them fully into something that can pass out of the body. And so this is where I just see so much overlap with what Jackie's talking about and what we talk about in our gene reports. We just call it by different names, right? She has her list and I have mine, but they're the same things, just using different language. And that's one of the reasons that I was so excited to interview her and to have her come on and talk to all of you. And one thing that I didn't mention the other night when we were talking about the GST family in the context of autism is that, especially for people who are double nulls, which would mean no copy variations, like a zero of GSTT1 and GSTM1. So they have decreased activity in ability to use glutathione. High doses of BPA down regulates GST activity further. So if you already don't have a lot of this, and then you're coming in contact with BPA on a regular basis from things you're drinking out of, or that your food has been stored in, or I mean, I don't know how many receipts we all handle on a regular basis, but even receipts, like things like that, that is going to make it harder for you. And VOCs from paint and other things that off gas, carpeting, things like that. Jackie was talking about this. Um, uh, Not having any copies of this is going to make this harder for you to handle. And that's why somebody can walk into a room and feel totally fine, and another person can walk into a room and be like, I feel really weird, I don't feel good, I don't know what's going on, is because their toxic load can go way overboard really, really fast. And there are things that we can do about it, because all the genes that we test for are actionable, right? And Jackie's telling you some of the actions, and we tell you some of the actions. So this is a really hopeful conversation, I think. And also, if you are double null for GST T1 and TM1, things like mercury, mold, etc., can create these reactive oxygen species, which usually uses glutathione to neutralize and go down a certain pathway. And if you can't utilize it, then it's sort of stuck, right? And yes, we do have other ways of detoxifying, right? We can methylate things. The SOD2 and GPX genes, that's all about mitochondrial health, which is really a huge thing in terms of energy, and is something that there's actually been research done in the autism community about. But I just wanted to kind of highlight these things because I saw so much overlap in what you were saying, Jackie. So how does that, do you have any comments?
Um, there are only a few gene SNPs that I have familiarity with, but I am familiar with the concepts that you're talking about. And I just think it's fascinating. I think it would be really fun to do a deep dive into, okay, what genetic SNPs are applying to the autistic experience. And because I think it's another way of fine tuning what kind of biohacks you do, what kind of results you get.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, so I want to talk for a minute about routine, and routine in terms of gut health and sensory regulation in particular. Like, how important do you find those things to be? Like, really paying attention to gut and really paying attention to like you talked about, media and other things that are being taken in, but that can also look like needing a break, needing some alone time. You know what I mean? Not wanting to go to, 5 Christmas parties 5 days in a row. You know what I mean? Things like that. So I was just wondering if you had anything you wanted to mention about that.
Well, first thing, I mean, when you bring up the word routine, I really have to touch on um, the cognitive load that is on an autistic brain when you have sensory sensitivity. When you have sensory sensitivities, you're taking in much more information visually, auditorially, touch, smell, taste. You're taking in more information, and your system has to process that somehow, figure out how to integrate and make sense, because there's a lot more signal coming in, and you've got to sort out what is signal, what is noise. And that is a fairly exhausting process. If any of you have ever spent time in another country where they speak a different language, and you have just enough of that language to, ask where the bathroom is and order a meal and get directions and that kind of thing, you end up being really, really, really exhausted a lot of the time because you're so far outside of your routines. You're constantly in a situation where anything could happen, state of change. you have no normal. And if you think about autistics having that much amount of information coming in all the time, the more routine that we have in our lives that are just, there are these things that we just do to take care of ourselves. They're established, people call them, there are all kinds of negative names for it. I call it a healthy coping mechanism is what I do. But essentially, you set up these routines that mean that your basics are taken care of, and you have the RAM. If you liken it to a computer, we're trying to put as much in subroutines in the unconscious as possible as autistics, because that means if there's a task that we have to have RAM for, we have to be able to handle change. We've got the space, we've got the resilience in our day to have a few occasions where things go sideways or new things happen, or somebody's party that we really want to go to and isn't a great match for us, but we want to be there anyway. You know, these kinds of things, in order to navigate them well, you really have to know yourself and know, okay, what pieces absolutely have to be in place so that I have the capacity to push my edge and push my limit in this way successfully without getting overstressed, without having meltdowns, without overtaxing systems that can't cope.
Thank you. I want to also, one thing that we didn't talk about last week and haven't really touched on here is movement and different types of movement being a better fit for different types of people. Or just for different people, not even necessarily types. I go to types because of, Chinese medicine kind of categorizing people and me breaking it down like, oh, you should do this kind of movement if you're this constitution or whatever. So what can you tell me about how you might tell one person to exercise? Because movement is great for moving things through and for enhancing neuroplasticity. And we have all of these, exercise is just great, but too much exercise of a certain type isn't great for certain people. How do you help people figure out, and then I'll talk about it a little bit from a gene perspective too, but how do you advise people about movement, Jackie?
Well, I actually come at it from a fun perspective. I find activities that that person finds fun, because if it's fun, it's not pushing any system too hard. And once we can figure out what kind of movement is fun, I got one autistic friend into swing dance at one point, and that was really fun. But as soon as you can find activities that light someone up, you're not doing damage, because they'll do it for as long as it lights them up, and then they'll stop when it stops lighting them up. And the main thing is we've got this regimentation idea around exercise, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do, move this and take care of that. And I think that we're really missing out on the joy of living in autism, and movement is one of the major pathways to joy. Sensory sensitivity is another pathway to joy. It's just not a pathway to joy in cities where 99% of what you see is horrible, 99% of what you smell is horrible, 99% of what you hear is horrible. You know, if you're out in nature, it's a different kettle of fish entirely. But movement is one of those places where fun can come to the surface quickly. And if someone is having fun, they're really clear. Okay, I'm having fun. All right, it's not as much fun. It's time for me to do something else.
I love that. I love that. Talk about, the ultimate individual plan, right?
Mhm.
What brings you joy?
Yes.
Um, so people, if you're looking at your either sleep or mood and behavior profile, you'll see BDNF. And people with the GG type, they produce a lot more BDNF. Whereas people, A is actually dominant. So people who are either AG or AA, they do this, they're less efficient at making BDNF and therefore having this level of resilience in certain ways. And so what we tell people is, vitamin D is really important, sunlight is really important, and then 30 to 45 minutes at 70 to 75% of maximum heart rate. But you have to look at the rest of your report to see whether or not that's going to be creating too much oxidative stress for your body. So how well you're detoxing. So if that doesn't feel good, so it's a matter of balancing it out, right? And making sure that you're not working on one gene at the expense of four other ones. And that's one of the reasons that we think of things as a system, and we don't ever give advice solely based on one gene, even though in our gene reports we say, well, because of this. But when we are as practitioners talking to people, we're trying to take the whole person into account. And when it comes to your immune system, which is also something Jackie mentioned, paying attention to your vitamin D. How well do you convert it from the sun? Some people don't do this as well as others or as quickly. How well do you transport it around the system? Are you able to transport a lot of it or just a little bit of it? And then there's binding and utilization within the cells. So vitamin D is a huge thing, not only for BDNF, but also for immunity. There's a gene that looks at vitamin C and zinc and vitamin A, and all of those are important, as well as sleep. It's really hard to have a healthy immune system if you're not sleeping well. And Jackie mentioned, if you're not sleeping well, there's probably some inflammation. But if you're not sleeping well, you can end up with inflammation. So it becomes this circle where those two things are feeding one another. And so looking at your sleep report and figuring out, how much do I need to do in terms of sleep hygiene? What's a more ideal thing for me? What hacks can I do to get my sleep going better? And then what things can we do to reduce inflammation so that sleep also comes a little bit easier? We are almost ready to start with our Q&A, Jackie, but I was wondering if you had a thought that you didn't get to, probably more than one, that you wanted to share with our audience before we get started with our Q&A.
Well, I think the one point I really want to raise is that we have a culture that says nothing can be done about autism. And, in many ways, the whole genetic conversation, the way it starts out is, oh, it's your genes, it's your fault. It's another way of putting things on the parents. And that just makes me angry and sick at heart. Because really, when you look at epigenetics, we're in the driver's seat. The choices we make can determine what kind of quality of life we have. And things like Down syndrome don't even occur in traditional indigenous societies that live hyper-nourished outdoor lives their entire lives. In the rainforests, the people who live there, you see the genetics of Down syndrome. You don't see the expression of Down syndrome because they are living a full, healthy life with lots and lots of antioxidants. And so you never see Down's expression because their bodies are getting everything they need to truly thrive. And my belief is, if we're giving ourselves what we need to truly thrive, and we're navigating in an informed way, there's no reason that you can't have amazing quality of life as someone with autism or as a family member supporting someone with autism.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jackie. Yeah, all of our work here at the DNA Company is definitely actionable and empowering, not saying this is your fate, right? It's like, what can be done so that you can feel the best that you can. So 100%. All right, let's get to our Q&A. Our first question is from Celine. Do you think that the reason autism can take time to express itself is because over time the body gets toxic from a lack of ability to detox like a typical individual?
Okay. So toxins come in a variety of ways. And so let's start with human reproduction, which is the very beginning. If a mother and a father have lots of toxins in their body, A father has more restricted outlets for detoxing. It'll come out through the breath first. That's about 70% of the toxins. And then some more comes out through the digestive system. And then if that can't handle it all, it comes out in the sweat. You end up with stinky sweat or rashes or eczema or psoriasis or something like that. And then if the airways and the gut and the skin can't handle it all, it starts to come out in the reproductive pathways. One of the reasons that men's sperm count has been going down so much is that the seminal fluid is a major detox pathway for men to get rid of toxins. And so the poor little lads are swimming in toxic soup on their way out. Now, the tricky thing here is that women who are, exposed to the same toxins, yes, they've got the same pathways in terms of the airways and the gut and the skin, but then they've also got menstrual fluids, and menses tend to be very, very difficult for people with high toxicity. So this is one of the indicators, oh, I might need a detox if you've had difficult cycles. It'll also come out in developing tissues. It'll come out in breast milk. And so Japanese have done some wonderful studies on eating lots of cilantro and preventing the toxification of your baby through breast milk. And so if you're nervous about this, please breastfeed and just eat cilantro. The flavor. There's some really, really good data out there on protecting your baby. But in terms of detoxifying into the baby, when adults have sex, you've got seminal fluid and semen coming into a woman's vaginal tissue, and adaptation-wise, women actually get some of their nutrients from having sex. The tissues are very absorptive, and it tends to be a very nourishing soup when it's healthy coming from the male, and it's part of what helps the female make healthy babies, particularly in some cultures where women are not necessarily as optimally nourished as men. But unfortunately, that very absorptive tissue also absorbs toxins. And so you're getting your guy's load on top of whatever load you're taking in. And what we're seeing right now is a very rapid rise in mutations, in stillbirths, and in spontaneous abortions, where children, particularly first children, are being built of the wrong materials and can't survive. So it's often the second or third try that parents are having a successful pregnancy. But that doesn't mean the child isn't still being built of some of the wrong materials. So then you've got that child arriving and they're kind of functional, but they've got superbugs in the environment. They've got contaminants in, if they're being bottle fed. I'm not even going to talk about bottle feeding. Okay, breastfeed, please. But the thing is, there are lots and lots of different insults in the environment, up to and including the bedding. Babies who sleep on natural bedding don't have sudden infant death syndrome. And so, it's worth kind of looking, what kind of environment are these children arriving into, and what kind of assaults and insults are they being exposed to as babies? And there's this huge debate there about vaccines and autism, and I'm just going to touch on it very lightly. There is no proof that vaccines cause autism. What there is 80% of parents who have a child who got autism later, that child got autism within 6 weeks of a normally scheduled vaccine round. And what we also have is an understanding that vaccines, they're an immune challenge, they're a toxicity challenge, they're a stress challenge. They can prompt crossing the blood-brain barrier. They're hard on the gut microbiome. Okay, we just covered all five of the ways that inflammation can arrive in the body with one product. And I'm not saying that vaccines cause autism. What I'm saying is that in a vulnerable system, the likelihood of a crash is much higher the tougher an insult you provide. And vaccines are fairly tough insults.
I just want to add to that that in some of the studies that I was looking at in preparation, they were talking about a fever happening, and so someone appearing to um, having no symptoms or signs of being autistic, and then a fever, an illness happens that has a fever, and then suddenly it's there. And I think that it could be said that it's the same mechanism, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to throw that into the mix because the original question was about like something seeming to either develop over time from toxin buildup, but not appearing immediately. And so that was another. I just wanted to throw that into the mix in terms of why it's suddenly it can seem like it wasn't there and then it is. So
Yeah. The other thing to watch for is that when autistic people get a high fever, we're often much more functional, and that's a pretty good indicator that there's chronic infection and likely gut microbiome challenges that are being suppressed by the high fever, and information about what approaches to take to help that individual function optimally.
interesting. Daniela is asking if your questionnaire is publicly available to view. I don't know if it's on your website or if you have someone make an appointment in order to see that, but
Yeah, it's a make an appointment thing, and it's uh, I'm working on a short version that I can do in a 5-day challenge because I want to make it much more accessible to people than it's been. But really, it's the product of about 35 years of me kind of combing through the data and going, okay, what makes sense of which, and putting together this massive chart of, okay, if you've got this symptom, it can correlate with these 3 of the 5 root causes. And so it's it, it's a complex tool, and I'm doing my best to simplify it and make it more accessible, and I will get there as soon as I possibly can.
but in the meantime, you're happy to go over it with people.
Yeah.
Our next question, also from Daniela, is molecular hydrogen helpful for autism?
Oh, molecular hydrogen is helpful for just about everything. Any inflammatory state, molecular hydrogen is one of the things that just quenches things quickly. And so yes, absolutely yes. Anything that will quench inflammation, go play.
Sheila is asking, there was a question about vaccines, but we already covered that. Sheila is asking, are there any tests to determine our home's quality of air?
Oh, well, there are petri dish tests and filtration tests that will let you know what kind of toxins and what kind of molds you might have in the air in your home. But really, you look around at your furniture. Do you have any particle board or press board in your furniture? Um, what upholstered items and bedding and so on do you have? Was it organic cotton or is it conventional that's been treated with really scary flame retardants? Um, what is your insulation made of? And are there places where the insulation is open to the air in your home? Because uh, insulation is held together with formaldehyde glues, and there's nothing that is as brain damaging as formaldehyde that is in ready use throughout our culture. Um, I have what I call the autism aggravator assessment. It takes about 2 hours to do. And it's something that I do for a lot of clinics and businesses who are looking at how do we make our space more accommodating of people with autism. And that might be a useful step to go through to just go, okay, what do we have in our internal environment, in our interior environment that we might want to switch out over time.
Thank you. The next question is, what are your recommendations to learn how to go from crisis to stabilization?
Oh, I'm kind of sad that I'm not in my normal environment because in my normal environment, I have a bunch of things right there to pull out. There are, okay, so there are both sort of crisis responses in the moment, and then there are the longer term. How do you get yourself to a place where you have more resilience, or the people around you to a place where they have more resilience? I have three top crisis response mechanisms that I've got with me all the time, and they're in various pockets and bags, but they're not right there for me to pick up and show to you. One of them is, oh, wait, I do have one right here. Okay, one of them is called Rescue Remedy. And this is a Bach flower remedy. It's a combination of five different flower essences. So it's a homeopathic. And this is any kind of shock, physical shock, emotional shock, toxic shock, food poisoning. It doesn't matter. Anything that takes you out of balance, you take 4 drops under the tongue, or if you do not react well to alcohol, which a lot of autistics don't, you find a place where the veins are close to the surface, inside of the elbow, inside of the wrist, and you put a drop there and you just rub it in because it will go through the skin. Alcohol is a nice solvent. It'll go into your bloodstream. It will get carried through your body. And within 10 minutes, you're back in balance again. I love this stuff. This is my go-to for autism parents. Um, the next one is, most of us on our phones, we've got there are four main frequencies with which the brain will resonate, and alpha and beta are sort of aroused states. Theta is going into deep meditative state and healing, and delta is going into dream state or really deep meditative states. And when you have brain entrainment audios that can take you into by by resonating at a frequency that's a harmonic of the frequency that you want your brain to resonate at, you entrain your brain to that frequency and you take yourself out of a stress response quickly. And when you do rescue remedy and a brain entrainment audio, it's additive. So it's an even faster response when you do them both. The third one that's at my top of the list favorites, there's this company called Systems .net, I think it is, and they produce a variety of different cards. And I think I've actually got a couple here. Yeah. So I mean, they're combining 8 different technologies that were tested in waiting rooms to find out if they could get people into a state of peace and balance before they came in for their psychology session. Because if people are in peace and balance before, and then they're resilient and they're ready for change when they actually arrive in the appointment. And so this group started in the 60s and 70s, developing tools that help bring you into a state of balance quickly. And I love the tools. They're great. They're very, very helpful. So those are my 3 top picks for short term. For longer term, um, it's remarkable how easy it is to learn to meditate at this point in time. Yes, you can do all of the old traditional, sit there and try to think of nothing for hours on end, or you can turn it into a mindfulness exercise that immediately takes you into a better state. And um, mindfulness is whether it's energy mindfulness, whether it's sensation mindfulness, whatever it is mindfulness of, it's one of the faster paths to start developing that skill set. And when you develop that skill set, you are significantly developing the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe of the brain in general. And that's the part that really, really suffers in those of us who um, have autism. And you can turn a brain around pretty quickly by helping to get the brain into a state of meditation that reinforces and rebuilds the frontal cortex and the prefrontal cortex.
Jackie, would you mind repeating the name of the cards really quickly?
So I believe the website is ichingsystems.net, as in the Chinese I Ching. It's one of the 8 technologies in these cards that have been found to actually impact people's energy frequencies. And I Ching is all about which gates in your meridians are open and closed.
So that's spelled I.
I
And
Ching.
it's pronounced E, but it's I. Yeah.
ICHING systems, systems.net. And so they've got they do these presentation days in a lot of different places in the world, and I'm a real fan of their instruments, of their tools.
And while we're talking about meditation, which anyone who has hung around me for a little while knows I love, we also did a webinar all about how your genetics can impact what type of meditation you like. And so a lot of people who may have been like, I tried meditating, it just wasn't for me. Maybe there's another kind that would be better for you based on your genetics and preferences. So that is a different webinar that you can check out about that. Sheila is asking, what are your thoughts on using Leela Quantum, spelled Leela, Quantum, and Somavedic, Somavetic products as a biohack for autism? I'm not familiar with either of those.
No, I'm not either. I mean, from the sound of it, they're nutritional products. But I don't know anything about them, and so I can't comment. I would need to research them to be able to talk about them with any degree of use.
Likewise. All right, Daniela is asking, what do you suggest to do if 9p21 is 6G? I think this one's for me. So because inflammation can affect you're more prone to sensitivity to inflammation, especially in the vessels, you want to be looking at all of the places where inflammation can be created. And so that includes your hormonal picture. How are you metabolizing and detoxifying your hormones? That's looking at your cardiometabolic profile and seeing, okay, how many enzymes do I make that help me digest starch, and where do I do it? And what are the effects on my blood sugar if it happens later on in my gut instead of in my mouth? Do I tend to gain weight and have more inflammation created by having a high saturated fat diet, like things like that? And then you're looking at your detox pathways and your immune pathways and your sleep profile. So basically, in a nutshell, the answer to to what you do if you have 6Gs and 9p21 is optimize everything else in your profile to protect your vessels from inflammation. So I know that probably sounds like a lot, but when I have a client that has that presentation, we one at a time will go through a system and be like, okay, make these changes. And then we go through another system and we're like, okay, now make these changes. And slowly over time, we optimize so that we can protect that. Maybe that's one of the reasons I like it so much, is because I can see all of these connections to it. And I'm like, we have to do something. If this one is 6Gs, then we have to make sure that all of the other ones are being optimized. I don't know. Deborah is asking, is there a way to address chronic infection that is wide-reaching for all kinds of things, viruses, bacteria, fungi, that may be unknown without comprehensive medical blood testing?
Oh, yes. I mean, oxygenation therapies, and there what, about 8 or 10 different ways you can get oxygenation therapy, are kind of top of the list, because oxygenation will help to detoxify, will help to draw down inflammation, and will help to kill off any kind of invaders, up to and including parasites. So there are things like ozonated saunas that you can take at different spots. There are things like various oxygenation therapies, like hydrogen peroxide baths and chlorine dioxide, various treatments. I mean, there are so many pathways, but oxygenation, you it's eh, you have to do this in a thoughtful way, because if you're doing an oxygenation therapy, the body uses redox, oxidation reduction, to get most of its jobs done. And anytime that you're adding more oxygen into the system, you have to make sure that you've got the resilience to balance out. And a lot of people go into oxygenation therapies without understanding that, and so not getting enough antioxidants away from the time that they're doing the oxygenation therapy. So you've got to do this in a balanced approach, but oxygenation therapies are very safe and very effective at getting rid of chronic infection situations.
And this is where you want to look at your genes to see whether or not you are someone who might need extra antioxidants, like above and beyond, and or whether or not once the antioxidants, if you have a faster SOD2 than a GPX gene, then, and yes, I will look up the letters for you while Jackie's talking with her next one. I'll put them in the chat because I'm the worst at just talking about stuff and not necessarily telling you the exact letters. You can end up with too much hydrogen peroxide. So the SOD gene can start converting using the antioxidants, but if your GPX is falling behind, then at a mitochondrial level, you can end up with peroxide where too much where you don't want it because it hasn't been able to convert into water and oxygen. So just that's my 2 cents on that one. So I will put those in the chat while Jackie is answering Cynthia's question. How early do you recommend addressing these changes given an early 5 or 6-year-old diagnosis of autism? Are there strategies that are better for children?
Oh, absolutely. There's strategies that are better for children. And the more that you can implement before a child hits, age 11 or 12, the more that you can get there before puberty, onset of puberty, the more likely you are going to have an individual who can really function optimally. The challenge is that a lot of the detox pathways that are already challenged and overworked are going to be even further challenged and overworked by the hormone storm, particularly a hormone storm that's going to be out of balance the way autistic hormone storms are when puberty sets in. So, the more that you can do early, the better. And really the interventions that I outlined, the 12 plus the 13th spiral and reconnect, those are the things you want to look at. You really want to look at all of those things, all of those aspects of your life. And by all means, start with cherry picking. Start with what is easy to deal with. Start with, okay, I know that laundry dryer sheets are some of the most neurotoxic things on the planet, and therefore they will never come into my home again. And cherry pick, do the easy stuff first, and do the stuff that impacts you quickly first, because those are the things that you're going to see results from relatively fast. Those first 5 are things that you're going to start seeing improvements within weeks to months. The others are things that you will see improvements from, but they will be longer term improvements in terms of how do we optimize quality of life for this individual.
Thank you, Jackie. Okay, our next question is about detoxification after IVF medications, because this person, Faye, is saying IVF medications add an extra load to children diagnosed with autism. What can be done to help with detoxification from your perspective?
Okay. So there are lots of things that can support babies and infants and toddlers and preschoolers in detox. I have I have a cheat sheet that I put together about 30 years ago because I had too many clients and friends, figuring they needed to detox, going to the health food store, getting a one-size-fit-all detox kit, doing 3 of them at once, and getting themselves incredibly sick because they didn't understand what was going to happen when they over challenged their drainage pathways. And so what I did was I put together a cheat sheet of, if you have, a headache, that's a symptom of often toxic overwhelm and inflammation as a result. And what can you do to get a headache down fast? And there are about 30 different symptoms, up to and including really raunchy body odor or foot odor. And you if you have any of the things on that list, you've got a short list of items of things you can do for anyone of any age to support them in detoxing. But really, edibles are one of the best ways to safely support a detox. If it's in food and it's part of normal diets around the globe, there are so many foods that will support a detox, and I'm going to encourage you to start there. Get off all toxic food and toxic beverages, make sure you're hydrating enough, and support yourself with foods that support a detox.
I was going to say something similar even during pregnancy, knowing what your detox pathways look like genetically so that you know how to take care of yourself.
Yes.
Because the mother is sharing so many things with the unborn baby at that point, that a lot can really be done to support even before birth. And knowing what you have as a person can really help, and supporting that, because they will take everything from you um, as they develop, and that's just the way that it goes, right? So you want to make sure that what you're passing on, through the placenta is the best, for your body, and that means it might not be the same prenatal or the same diet that your neighbor or your sister ate that helped her to thrive during pregnancy and helped her children to thrive. It means looking at your individual makeup and going from there. So,
Yeah.
Marianne, I just want to let you know, I'm going to give you a little heads up here because Marianne's asking about discussing vaccines, which we did touch on, that we were going to do an entire webinar talking about vaccines. I think it's next month. It might be January. I don't remember, but we're not, none of us are afraid to talk about it. It's just complicated, right? So
Yeah.
it's not a simple thing. And so talking about it requires a degree of nuance that we would rather dedicate a whole webinar to. Jackie handled the topic in a really interesting way, I thought, that was like, this is why this, and can we say it's causal? Not necessarily, but the things that this causes can cause this, right? So that's she did address that. Okay. Lisa is asking, Jackie, what do you see as the best thing family members can do to support the person with autism?
Oh, hands down, there are no families with an autistic child in the family where the whole family isn't expressing inflammatory health problems. Like, the inflammation that causes autism doesn't come from nowhere. I have worked with so many families over time, and every family member has inflammatory health problems, mental, emotional, physical. And so a lot of families think, oh, if I just do these interventions for my child, things are going to get better. What I do is I encourage the entire family, and preferably some of the extended family. If you can get best friends, aunts and uncles, grandparents, neighbors, whoever involved in making these lifestyle changes so that there are multiple safe environments for that child to go spend time in, up to and including playgroups. What this means is that awareness is really going up in terms of what drags down autism capacity and what builds it up. And B, that child is able to kind of grow up in social environments that are supportive, that are welcoming, that are recognizing, oh, behavior has gone up. What is it in the environment that has made the stress go up, rather than going, you're misbehaving, you need to go somewhere else. There are, if the whole family embarks on this process of detoxification, it also means that subsequent siblings are much less likely to be in the autistic spectrum. There's a whole there's a whole program that I'm working on, not that I want to genetically erase autism because I think it's an adaptive response to stress. If you have a stressful culture, what is a better response than having um, babies born who are introverted and focus on problem solving as opposed to extroverted and focus on socializing. The, in my opinion, what's happened is we've pushed the stress envelope too far. And so the kind of debility that we're seeing in autistic individuals is skyrocketing. And we need to do a course correct. We need to say, oh, better living through chemistry maybe isn't the best choice for us. We need to be living in ways that optimize our resilience as human beings on all factors.
Jackie, we are out of time. This has been, I know it goes by quickly, right? You think, wow, an hour and a half is a long time, but then it just flies right by. So thank you so, so much for being with us this evening. And I look forward to talking with you again really soon. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks for being here.